I'd like to welcome you to the 21st Century Local History Club. What might your name be?
Dennis Freeman.
Nice to meet you.
How you doing?
What were your occupations?
Oh my gosh. Well, first I went to school. I got out of school. I went in the Air Force for 4 years. And I spent time in Colorado. And I spent time 1 year in Korea. I came back and I spent time in Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, where I was discharged. And after that, I came up home. I started work in an automobile parts department, working as a parts delivering boy, driving truck. And then from there, I became a salesman. And I worked on the road selling automobile parts for several years. And after that, I decided that wasn't making enough money. I started selling encyclopedias. And I sold alarm systems. And then I went to the glorious job of a car salesman. And I sold automobiles for Brose Ford for a few years. Decided that was a very difficult thing to do. And then I decided I was going to get in the machine shop business. So then I started out as an apprentice machinist at Manhasset Tool and Die in Lancaster. From there, I went to, I believe it was called Ward Hydronics, which was owned by Ward Sievenpiper. From there, I graduated in my machining abilities to working at Scott Aviation. And then from there, I went into inspection department. From Scott Aviation, I went to another company, was Riley Gear in North Tonawanda. Riley Gear in North Tonawanda, I became involved with inspection, and I worked on the first and the second shift for quite a few years. Then it was bought out, and I was laid off. Then I went to National Gypsum Company, where I worked for Richard Kratz. Then the company called me back, and I went back there. And after a few years, I had an opportunity to move to the machine shop over at Ward Hydronics, or Strippet, excuse me, at Whale Strippet. And from Whale Strippet, I worked in the grinding department, running several machines. And then I graduated through Erie Community College at that time to a junior engineering degree, and I went into the engineering department. And I was in the engineering department for approximately 2 years. Found that that still wasn't satisfying me. And as I did part-time sporting goods things out of my home, selling firearms and repairing guns, and I enjoyed the hobby of fixing and repairing old guns, that blossomed into a small business at my house. Then I had an opportunity to get into the store that used to be the Western Auto Store at 38 Main Street in Akron, which was previously owned by Clyde Lee, and before that it was a bank it was an old bank. And so I went in there and I rented the building and the space from Joseph D. Gasbury, and then I started Freeman Sports Shop, and that was in 1974, I believe, and I've been there ever since. And along with that, I had some problems with some bad checks, and I got involved with court, and I thought that was an interesting thing. So I ran for election for the village judge, and in 1985 became the Village of Akron judge. And in 1989 I ran for the town judge and became town judge. So I am now owner and operator of the sporting goods store. I do gunsmithing repair, I do appraisals, evaluations for estates, I do museum work, and I am also the Village of Akron judge and the town of Newstead judge, which brings us up to the current time.
Holy cow. Okay. That's a lot of occupation.
And what are you president of?
I'm president of Newstead Historical Society for the last 2 years, and I've been a member since 1983, I believe. And I remember when they voted to get the Octagon House, and I was president at that time, and we voted to obtain the Octagon house and buy it, and I think it cost us $28,000 at that time.
Have you ever always lived in Akron, Newstead? What brought you to this community?
No, I was born and raised in Depew. I went to school in Depew, and after I got out of school and went in all the different jobs, I met Dorothy Pfenning, who was at that time living on Clarence Center Road in East Amherst. Dorothy and I met at a roller skating rink on Genesee Street. We dated for several years, and in 1965 got married. And at that time, my dad and his brother, was Sam Freeman and Donald Freeman, used to live on a farm up on Main Road years and years ago. And when my dad left the farm, he moved to Buffalo, New York, or Cheektowaga, met my mother, and they moved to Depew. And that's how I was born in Depew. But when my wife and I got together, my wife's family being from the Clarence area, and my family originally being from Akron area, I decided that we were going to, my wife and I decided that we were going to look for a home in this area. So we found a place that Paul Yoder had sold to his son-in-law, Chester Scholl, and that was on McNeely Road. So we bought the house. Even before we were married, we owned the house. We didn't move in together and live together. And then after we got married, we moved into McNeely Road house. And that was in 1965. And we lived there until 1982, until we moved into the village and bought the old Perry's house, which was on 1 Pearl Street, was the original plant for the Perry's ice cream company. We remodeled it, tore some of the old buildings down, and that is where we presently live.
In your life here at Akron, what local historical event impacted you the most?
You mean something that happened in Akron?
Yeah, historical event. What?
Well, I can't say, other than probably getting involved with a historical society. Historically, that's a historical event. But an actual happening in the, you mean in the village? Or happened here?
Yeah, it can be anywhere. I mean, in Akron, though.
I suppose if you were to look at events naturally, since I've been living in Akron, the main event that I can remember in my life that sort of impacted me was the assassination of President Kennedy. I can remember exactly where I was and everything else, but that's not when I was living in Akron. That happened in 1964, I believe, 63. That was, I think everybody that was alive during that period of time can remember exactly where they were and what they were doing, excuse me, at that time in life. Other than that, naturally going to the moon, those things. But I wouldn't say they've impacted my life. My biggest thing that's probably impacted my life is marrying the girlfriend that I had, Dorothy Pfenning, having the children on McNeely Road, having my kids grow up and graduate from Akron High School, and becoming a judge, becoming involved with politics. Those are probably some of the biggest things that have impacted my life. And then getting involved with many, many people in the community in the village of Akron, either through court or through the Historical Society or having a store and a business on Main Street.
I see you had the opportunity to meet several famous local and national politicians. Can you describe these experiences? Can you discuss their impact on you?
I think the first thing that as far as well-known politicians, years ago Al Gore was going to run for president, and he had a meeting in Cheektowaga. And he came in from the airport, and myself and Larry Perot, who works for, he's a partner of Nicholas Perot, attorneys, we went to breakfast, and we met Al Gore, and we had breakfast with him, and there was probably only 50 people there. That's probably been the first time I've ever met a politically well-known national figure. And then since then, naturally, Bill Paxton, who came from this area, I got to know Bill fairly well. Leon Paxton, who is one of the judges that started family court in the city of Buffalo in the Buffalo-Erie County area. I was at Thomas Reynolds when he got elected after Bill Paxton had resigned or left being congressman. Tom Reynolds ran in his position. When he won, we were invited to his inauguration, which was on, I think, January 6th, several years ago. That was very important because we met several of the people that were in the House of, and the Speaker and other politicians who came in to congratulate him, and we met those people. I can't think of anybody else offhand that I may have had contact with. Oh, recently, through business associates, I have been in communication with James Earl Jones, who happens to be one of a customer of mine, I guess you might call it. I've talked to him several times. I've never met the man personally, but I've communicated with him several times through the business, and very nice gentleman to meet and talk to. I haven't met him personally. I said sometime I might go to New York City. I'd like to arrange a meeting with him. He lives in Pauling, New York, which is north of New York City on the Hudson River.
I see that you feel most impacted by the following national historical events: World War II, Korean War, the assassination of Kennedy, and the World Trade Center disaster. Can you share your thoughts on these experiences?
Well, naturally, World War II, I was just a young child at that time. I was born in 1939. I don't really remember an awful lot of the events that happened during World War II. It seemed like we didn't really dwell on it, but I can remember gas rationing. I can remember getting this white substance and mixing a red dye with it to make what we called at that time like a margarine. Butter was hard to get, eggs were hard to get, meat was hard to get. You had rationing stamps, you had, we used to have a coal furnace, and I think the people that ran the trains at the time used to throw coal out on the railroad tracks purposely for some people like us to go and scrounge and use for heating our homes. So the first indication of war probably through those things are what I can remember. And then naturally the Korean War, when I was older, I wasn't old enough to be involved in the Korean War. I was still only 14 at the time Korean War broke out. But I can remember standing on the front steps of my house, it was on 80 Lincoln Street in Depew, and within probably almost a stone's throw, there were 3 young men that I knew personally that went to Korea, and within 3 months were being buried here locally, and that impacted me quite a bit. My sister used to live next to the Buffalo Cemetery, and I can remember one day hearing taps being blown down at the end of her street, and I went down and looked through the fence, and I can remember seeing, it seemed to be 20 or 25 open graves, and those are all young men that had been killed in the Korean conflict, all being buried at the same time, and they had the hearses lined up and all the people, and that was quite a historic event as far as I'm concerned, and a big impact on my life. Naturally, the death of assassination of President Kennedy, none of us had any idea, and all of a sudden it happened, and it was on the news, and we were glued to the television sets and watching the processions and the funeral and all the things that happened after that. And then we saw Jack Ruby kill, what was the name of, I can't even remember his name now, that it was the assassination person. But we saw that on live television. All of a sudden they were walking down the hall, and the next thing you know, Jack Ruby came out and shot the person who assassinated the president. Tremendous thing. The other big thing that I think didn't impact my life, but naturally the death of overseas, I can't remember her name now. She died in that car accident.
Oh, Princess Diana?
Princess Diana, yeah. And the things that she was doing at the time, and the things she was involved with, and all of a sudden she was gone. And that was quite a momentous time and period in our history. It didn't impact my life a lot. Naturally, the World Trade Center, I looked at that and I just couldn't believe that that was happening, and all the events that happened since then. Tremendous impact on the world at large, the economy, the way we live, the way we do things, security in this country. Probably the biggest one event other than Pearl Harbor that's changed people in this country's lives and all over the world so much.
You listed your marriage, being elected judge, and becoming a Christian as in having impact in your personally. Can you elaborate?
I think my wife has kept me always focused on family things, things that make a difference in life. Try to not focus too much on the little incidentals that tomorrow you even forgot about them. Mostly concentrate on those things that affect us down the road in the long term. And I believe, and it's probably not the politically correct thing to say, but I think being a Christian and believing in God helps me through an awful lot of decisions that I make in my family life, my personal life, and also in court. I believe that if you're going to have justice, it has to be tempered with mercy, and I think by having a Christian background, that helps me to look at a person and treat them not just as a number or statistic, but as an honest-to-goodness human being, and look at them with mercy and saying that they have to pay for their crime, but the court, and through my eyes, it's my job to not only punish the people that are guilty, but to try to help those people so that they don't commit the same thing and the same crimes again.
I understand that you have interest in history, specifically the Civil War and the Newstead Historical Society. Can you describe?
This is funny. I remember when I was a young child, probably 12, 13, or 14, whenever you get into the Civil War and history in school, I can remember getting on the school bus, and I was buying antique guns when I was 12 years old, and I just loved historically connected events and things that connected you with history. I would get on the school bus, and I'd have this old Civil War musket. Today, if you even walk near a school bus with an old gun of any kind, they'd probably throw you in jail. But I had this old Civil War musket that I bought for $15. I'd saved up my money from having a paper route. My mother and I walked over the Railway Express in Depew to pick it up. And there's this huge, great big gun. It was almost as tall as I was, or taller at that time. And I took it to school, and I did a little history program on the Civil War using that old gun as part of the history event at that time. And I like to collect antique firearms because they are connected so much with our history. Back when we first started with the Revolutionary War with the French, we were using some firearms that were made by Kentucky rifle makers at the time, because we had no government making firearms, so that we could oppose the British and the taxation and everything else that we resented so much, and we resented the fact that we weren't a free people at that time. So the firearms connect me with historical events that seem to have shaped the history of this country one way or the other. The Revolutionary War with the Committee of Safety muskets and the Committee of Safety getting together, purchasing firearms from France, and the first United States gun that was marked that way had a U.S. cut into the lock plate or stamped into the stock. That became our first U.S. issued firearm that we built an army with. And then naturally War of 1812, the Civil War, all the events that happened during the Civil War, the mechanical advances that we made, because previous to the Civil War, most of the firearms and most everything that we built was built by hand. It was hand assembled, handmade, hand put together, but nothing fit from one part to the next part of the same product. So it was Eli Whitney that invented the cotton gin, who also invented interchangeable parts through the production of firearms for the United States military. Each firearm had to have a part that, if it would break, could be taken off of the same gun and put on a same type of gun without any problem. And that he invented the first interchangeable parts, which were firearms. And then naturally the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II. So through firearms, I've been able to connect historical events and the things that have probably impacted most of our lives throughout history. What else do we have there?
And the NYST Historical Society.
NYST Historical Society has become a very integral part of my life. We raise funds to keep the grand old lady looking good. We'll be painting her pretty soon. It's costs an awful lot of money to maintain the Historical Society and keep the building that we have, plus the museum that we are in the process of updating and trying to get online so that we can have historical documents there. People will be able to go there and research their family histories, items that they may have found, and trying to find any kind of significance to them that are connected with Akron and the historical significance of all the places that have been in this town. If you look at Akron from 50 or 100 years ago, Akron used to have meat markets, shoe shops, dress shops, men's clothing stores, blacksmiths, barrel makers. We had probably one of the busiest little industries in this small of a community that you could come up with. We had 3 different companies making barrels strictly to haul limestone from this area, which eventually went down to New York City and helped build several of the bridges there. And to look at all those little businesses that every one of them could make a living. The candy shop owned by some Greek people here in town. And all those companies and all those little businesses made a living for somebody. And today, it takes so much money to make a living that it's almost impossible for a small businessman to have a small business and make a living at it.
Any questions?
I have several questions. The first one is, how old were you when you went to Erie Community College and got your junior engineering degree?
Probably, I would say 26, 27 years old. Because it's just shortly after I got married that I started going to Erie Community College. At that time, I don't think it was Erie Community College. It was Erie, I can't remember, Erie County Technical Institute.
Yeah,
That's back in the old days.
Right.
And now it's called Erie Community College.
Okay, I missed, because we had people coming through the door, how you became a judge. You're not a lawyer, correct?
No, the town and village judges are the only 2 judges positions that you do not have to be a lawyer. I get involved with it because probably shortly after I was in business, I ran into some problem with bad checks, and I went to court, and I wasn't satisfied in the way that the court proceedings were handled. And I mentioned it to someone. I said, I've been going back there for 6 months. The individual that I had received bad checks for at that time, that was probably 84, was $300 and some, which to me was a lot of money at that time. And then I found out that the individual who had written the bad checks, he and his son were arrested for robbing a bank in Texas, and we were never going to see those individuals, and I was never going to see any of my money, and that was the end of it. And so I mentioned to somebody that I didn't feel that the justice system was operating for the benefit of the people that get involved with it. So I ran in 1985. I won the village judge position, and I've been there since then. And thanks to Ellen Fry, a person who I admire and respect quite a bit, she has been with me since that time, and she's one of the mainstays of keeping the court running right and keep me on my toes and make me do what I'm supposed to do. And she's been a good asset in the village court.
So you've had to do a lot of studying since you've become judge to know all these laws, right?
Yes, and they're constantly changing, and every year you have to go to sessions of training, and you have to take exams to pass the exams. So in the spring they have a spring session, and in the fall they have a fall session. And normally what I do is I go to Potsdam University, where most of the schools are now, and they have a 1-week session where you can take your spring and your fall training at that one time, and then there's extra classes that you have for small claims, for dog problems, for penal law problems, for criminal problems, and you can brush up on those and you can get your updates. And the other thing I like about that is you get to talk to people in the state level. The comptroller used to be there, Carl McCall, he used to come to those meetings. Once in a while you'd see a governor, well, this time it's Pataki, but we used to have other governors come and speak to us, and lieutenant governors came. The head of the state police usually would come there. Jackie Smith, who was head of the Department of Criminal Justice Services in Albany and ran that office for the court system. So you get to know these people personally, and when you have a problem, you could call them up and talk to them, and they, if you bother them enough at school, they would remember who you were, and you could call them and say, Jackie, I got a problem, what do I do with this? Or somebody at the Department of Motor Vehicles in Albany, or down in New York City where the Office of Court Administration was located.
Has this developed an interest in the law for you? Are you considering becoming a lawyer?
If I were younger, I probably would. I'd go back to college. I'm getting near retirement age right now, and yes, it's very interesting to me, law. I look at some of the laws and I think they're very poorly put together, and I don't know how they ever get it made into law. But yeah, I'm very interested in the legal.
Like you are.
Yeah, and I spend a lot of time. Today, I was looking at several cases on some things that I've got to do. So I've got to do some research to make sure you do them properly, so that when you do get to court, all your I's are dotted and all your T's are crossed, so that you don't have something overturned on a decision, or you make a decision without the knowledge of what the law really supports.
Have you come across any laws in our little town that are outdated and outmoded that are kind of funny, like no dancing in Russell Park on Saturdays? Or
No, but we have a law on the books. Fortunately, just several years ago, the village did have an update on the codes. And up until that time, the old code book that we had was, I think, dated 1937, and it was illegal at that time for anyone to push a wheelbarrow full of pig swill down Main Street. We still have a law, I think now, and it might have, the new code book might have done away with that, where it was something to do with hitching a horse to a watering trough, but you must have water at that watering trough at all times while the horse is hitched up to the hitching post. And I think all these laws were done away with when they come out with the new code enforcement. But up until just a few years ago, those laws were still on the books.
now, was it a town committee that redid the code?
The village of Akron redid the code. The other thing that they forgot to do, and we had a case in court where I didn't want to do it, but the court, I didn't have the law to back me up. They had a discharge of firearms law in the village prior to the new code book, so that if you fired a firearm in the village, you were breaking law. To my knowledge right now, that was never brought over to the new code book, and the new code book says that this new code book supersedes and is in place of any old codes that used to be in place. And
so it's not illegal now to fire against
well,
the village?
I haven't researched the complete code book completely, but I don't believe, as of the last time I had court on that matter, that it was in there. So.
Politics is very involved in what you do now.
Pardon?
So politics is very important to your job now.
Oh yes, yeah.
How do you feel on some of the major politics, like issues? That are
Politically, as a judge, even at this level, I cannot make comments in public about political issues, about court issues that are going on in court at the present time, like Martha Stewart's case probably. And it's amazing, a local town and the village judge is held to the same standards as a Supreme Court judge of the United States. I live under the same code of ethics. I have to govern myself accordingly. My conduct is governed the same as a Supreme Court judge of the United States. There is no difference from the lowest level of the court to the highest level of the court in how I act and how I do things and how I must conduct myself in court in my public life as well as my private life.
Oh, by the way, congratulations on that 1985 when you got judged.
Oh, you know, it's been quite an experience. Sometimes it's been very difficult politically, but I feel if I can make an impact on people's lives to change the way they're doing things, or to make their lives better, or to help them through some rough spots where they've had some things in their lives that have cause them to do things that are against the law. If we can change those people's lives, then I think the court and what I've been involved with has been worthwhile. And that's the outlook. I don't go to court with the idea in mind that somebody has done something wrong, let's hammer them, let's throw them in jail. I look at it and say, the person's done something wrong, let's try to help them out, help them through this mess, and make them a stronger and better person because of the experience that they've had. That's my outlook on it.
Tell me, in your years in Akron, what's been your most memorable experience here, the most pleasant part of living here?
I think the most pleasant part is knowing the people, as many as I do, the 4th of July parades, which I enjoy tremendously. And I've been coming to Akron as a little boy. My dad used to bring me to Akron, and I remember riding on his shoulders watching the parade. And that has to be in the 40s and the 50s. But I think just the general idea of the people, getting to know the different people, getting to know the community well, where the people live, how they work, knowing their families, seeing the young kids grow up, go out into the world. And I'm amazed sometimes at how many come back to Akron, even though they go out to the world to make their living, and they still seem to come back to the little old village of Akron. And we still have small town values, and it's a enjoyable community to live in.
Wonderful. Tell me about Freeman Farm. That's my last question. Where was that located? And that was your grandfather's farm?
Freeman's Farm used to be, if you go to the Historical Society of Clarence and look at Freeman's Farm, it will be listed on, there's a map that they have, and that's a Civil War, pre-Civil War map, and it shows Freeman's Farm, but that's over in Swarmsville. And it wasn't until later that they moved to where Billy Bob's is right now, that little house that's next to Billy Bob's. That's where my dad and Uncle Sam moved, I think maybe a year or two after they were born. They moved to that farm.
Across the street?
No, it's
North
right next to Billy Bob's. If you look at Billy Bob's from the front, you'd put that little house to the left. That's where that was. And then Sam married Louise Berghorn, and that farm used to be owned by the Berghorn family, so that Louise and Sam lived there, and my cousin Lorraine and my other cousin Lowell grew up there, which is now Kelly Schultz's flea market and all that complex. That was all Freeman's Farm at the time. And my Uncle Sam used to own a Texaco gas station, and he ran that for years and years. And then when Kelly Schultz bought it out, Lowell owned it at that time, sold it out. And I think Lowell now is back in Akron again. He moved to Florida, now he's back in Akron on Cummings Road.
Well, it was nice meeting you, Mr. Freeman.
I thank you for having me,
Yes,
and
I thank you too.
hope I didn't ramble too much.
Oh, just fine.
Now, we're going to put this in an archives, and some students 50 years from now will pull it out and look at it, and they'll